A lot of NFL moves have went down over the last week as free agency is basically here and a lot more moves are going to go down. And I want to talk about some of the trades that went down over the last few days and give a letter grade on each deal that went down. So like always, you guys can let me know what you agree with or disagree with down below and just give me your thoughts and opinions on these trade if you just have a thought or maybe it's involving your favorite team. And the first one we have to talk about is a massive deal that went down on Friday night, kind of out of nowhere. The Las Vegas Raiders traded for Geno Smith from the Seattle Seahawks in exchange for a 2025 third round pick. And funny enough, that third round pick the Raiders used to get Geno Smith was acquired at the deadline in the 2024 NFL season when they traded away Devontae Adams to the Jets. So immediately for the Las Vegas Raiders, I have to give this trade an A+. Geno Smith is making just $25 million next year. He's the 20th highest paid quarterback in the league. And once Sam Darnold gets a new deal, that is going to even drop him a little bit more. But the big caveat is Geno Smith can be a free agent at the end of this upcoming season. Geno Smith turned his career around in that 2022 NFL season with the Seattle Seahawks, where he won Comeback Player of the Year. He finished 9th in MVP voting. He had a 69% completion percentage, which led the NFL. 9-8 record brought the Seattle Seahawks to the wild card weekend, and he threw for 30 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. He was one of the more accurate quarterbacks in all of the NFL after pretty much being a journeyman and a failed second round pick with the New York Jets basically a decade earlier. He was fully committed to being the Seattle Seahawks quarterback going forward. In 15 games in 2023, he threw for 20 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and a 64% completion percentage. But this is where we saw the Seattle Seahawks to have its cracks in the offensive line, and Geno Smith barely had any time to throw. That continued in 2024 when GM John Schneider did not really commit to improving the offensive line in the 2024 offseason. Geno was still productive though in 2024 as a 34-year-old. He had a 70% completion percentage. He threw for 21 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, and threw for 4,300 yards, his highest in his NFL career. And with Tyler Lockett no longer being a Seahawk, it looks like they're trading away DK Metcalf. Geno Smith was going to be on the market for the Seahawks since it was going to be the last year of his deal. And I love this as a bridge quarterback for the Raiders so much more than somebody like Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers would have been. Now, it does look like Geno Smith wants to get a new deal done in Las Vegas, and he wants to command over $40 million a year because he's comparing himself to guys like Derek Carr, who's making $37 million, maybe Kirk Cousins, who was making $45 million, Kyler Murray, who's making $46 million. And right now, Geno is better than those quarterbacks. And if I'm Las Vegas and they have all this cap space right now, I would commit a nice 2-year deal for Geno Smith. It could be $40 million a year. You're going to be fine going forward, especially if you still want to draft Shedeur Sanders at pick number 6, have him develop behind Geno Smith, or maybe you acquire a different young quarterback to be the backup to Geno. And like I said, I just love this option so much more for Las Vegas. It's getting an A+. I do think Geno Smith is still a top 15 quarterback in the NFL. He could still give the Raiders a chance to win next year and is going to a much improved offensive line from Seattle to Vegas. He's going to be protected by guys that were drafted high last year. Jackson Powers-Johnson from Oregon. Jordan Meredith and Colton Miller are going to be protecting Geno Smith, and this team still is going to have a ton of cap space if they want to add an offensive line free agent or still invest in the 2025 draft. It was also wild too that the Seattle Seahawks apparently offered the Raiders Geno Smith and DK Metcalf for Max Crosby. That would have been a Madden type trade. The Raiders quickly declined that, and they also re-signed Max Crosby to a new deal as well on Friday, and he's going to be making $35.5 million, and that's kind of like a domino that's going to fall in the defensive end market. So yeah, I think Las Vegas gets an A+. For Seattle though, I'm giving this a D+. Now, if Seattle goes out and gets Sam Darnold for pretty much a little bit of a lower price than what Geno Smith could get per year from the Las Vegas Raiders, if Geno does end up getting $45 million a year from Las Vegas and they give Sam Darnold $30 million, you know what? I don't hate that too much just because Sam Darnold is not better than Geno Smith right now, in my opinion, but he is just 27 years old. So you're getting almost as good of a quarterback that's 8 years younger than Geno Smith, and that would be a good step in the right direction for Seattle as they're kind of building a new era over there with Lockett gone, Geno gone, and it looks like DK Metcalf is going to be gone. Now, what weapons is Sam Darnold going to have if he does sign with the Seattle Seahawks? He would have a top wide receiver 1 right now that's incredibly young in Jackson Smith-Njigba, but are they going to draft a receiver? Are they going to sign somebody else? The weapons aren't great right now, and Sam Darnold is going to be going to a lackluster offensive line at the moment with pretty much just the tackles figured out, headlined by Charles Cross, but the interior offensive line is not good. But hey, they could save that money from Geno Smith to Sam Darnold, and they can invest that in the offensive line this offseason. So right now, it's a tentative D+ for Seattle because I don't think trading away Geno Smith for a third round pick was really worth it at this moment. But if they do go out and get Sam Darnold, who isn't far behind Geno Smith and is still just 27 years old, I will like this trade a little bit more from them, and I would probably bump this up to something in the B's. Another deal that went down involved two divisional teams, which is kind of surprising. It involved the Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Jaguars were going to cut Christian Kirk, but instead they were able to trade him to the Houston Texans in exchange for a 2026 7th round pick. So for Jacksonville, it's kind of tough. I do like the acquisition of Christian Kirk. It basically costed them nothing. There's not a ton of risk to this deal either. Christian Kirk does have his injury concerns over the last few years, but I think he could be a good complementary receiver to Nico Collins, who is the bona fide wide receiver one over there, with Stephon Diggs most likely not coming back, and Tank Dell is most likely going to be out all of next year and may not play again in his career, which is really sad. So they go out, they get a veteran wide receiver. They can absorb his cap hit because they're still just paying CJ Stroud his rookie contract at the moment, and Christian Kirk was banged up over the last 2 seasons. His last fully healthy season was in 2022, where he had over 80 receptions and 1,100 reception and over 1,100 receiving yards. If Kirk can stay healthy, or at least just give them 14 games this year, I think he could be a very solid wide receiver too for CJ Stroud, opposite of Nico Collins, who also had his injury concerns last year with that hamstring injury. And I still expect Houston to add another receiver this offseason. Maybe they try to reunite CJ Stroud with his college teammate Emeka Egbuka in the draft. Maybe they try to get a different veteran on the market as well. Might not cost them too much. But either way, Jacksonville was able to get at least some draft capital instead of just cutting Christian Kirk outright. And I think Houston, for basically nothing, got a good wide receiver too for the 2025 season. Next up, we're going to lump in the 2 trades the Chicago Bears made for some interior offensive linemen, one with the Chiefs and one with the Rams. They started off by acquiring Jonah Jackson from the Rams in exchange for a 2025 6th round pick. Basically nothing for the starting offensive guard that was just 1 year into that 3-year, $51 million extension. He's making about $17.5 million against the cap this year, and then has a cap hit of $17 million next year, but there is 0 dead cap to that. So basically this is an expiring deal for Jonah Jackson, who's going to his age 28 season. I think he could be utilized very well in the Ben Johnson offense. And I think for just giving up a late round pick in 2025 for a proven starting offensive lineman, it is definitely worth it for Chicago. So I think this is going to get a B+, as well as them going out and getting Joe Thuney, a Super Bowl winning offensive guard from the Kansas City Chiefs. Joe Thuney's in the final year of his deal. He has a $16 million cap hit this season, and then is an unrestricted free agent in 2026. So there's not a ton of risk to this trade with the Chicago Bears, who have a ton of cap space at the moment, as they had $45 million going into this offseason. And I'm glad they're investing into the interior offensive line, because this draft could be hit or miss with interior offensive linemen. Are they going to move some guys from offensive tackle inside, like Gray Zabel and Kelvin Banks, if they were to draft one of those guys? But instead, they go out, they get Joe Thuney, they go out and get Jonah Jackson, who are proven starters in this league for some good teams, and they don't really run any long-term risk into these contracts going forward. And not having to give up any day 2 picks in these trades, I think was a job well done by Ryan Poles. You're going to have Darnell Wright continuing to improve, and possibly go out and get Armand Membu with the 10th overall pick in this draft. We can have a very productive offensive line next year for Caleb Williams, who desperately needs improvement from the offensive line. I think the Rams just wanted to get out of Jonah Jackson, and we knew that. This was definitely surprising from the Kansas City Chiefs, but it makes sense in the grand scheme of things, because they didn't have a lot of cap to work with, and they had to tag Trey Smith, so he wasn't going to leave on the open market. So this is going to allow them to work out a new deal with Trey Smith, who is one of the best interior offensive linemen in the NFL. And it's not just Trey Smith they're going to be able to afford now. They were able to bring back Hollywood Brown on a 1-year deal worth $11 million. And they also recently re-signed Nick Bolton, one of their best linebackers that was going to be on the open market, to a 3-year, $45 million deal. And we've seen in the past that the Chiefs are able to move on from some of these veterans and still be able to compete for a Super Bowl, like Tyreek Hill a couple years ago, but Jerry Sneed last offseason. So I don't think they're really going to feel that big blow from losing Joe Thuney in this trade, because you still got Trey Smith on the interior, you still have Creed Humphrey, and I'm assuming they're going to go after an offensive tackle in round 1 as well. So I think this Chiefs O-line is going to be fine next year, as long as they can stay healthy. And in the grand scheme of things, I like this for the Bears. I don't think these guys are going to be long-term fits here. Maybe Jonah Jackson a little bit more than Thuney because he is younger, but it should help out the interior offensive line in the short term. I also didn't really talk about the Deebo Samuel trade too much as well, but the Washington Commanders acquired Deebo Samuel from the San Francisco 49ers in exchange for a 5th round pick. And the Commanders have almost $80 million in cap space after this trade, and I think it was worth it. You get a new gadget receiver for Jaden Daniels, who can now invest a lot of money around him because he's under that rookie contract, and he was a top 10 quarterback in the NFL last year as a rookie who brought you to the NFC Championship game. Let's go out and get weapons for him because they didn't have a lot of receivers under contract. You have Terry McLaurin, who's a safe wide receiver one for this team, but now you have Deebo Samuel, who could be utilized under Cliff Kingsbury as somebody out of the backfield, as somebody in the slot. And yes, Deebo wasn't as productive last year as he's been in the past, and he did play 15 games last year, but he was dealing with some injuries. He had pneumonia last year. It was just a down year overall for the San Francisco 49ers. I expect the Washington Commanders to invest more in their offensive line. Maybe they can add another running back as well. And just having Zach Ertz coming back, having Terry McLaurin, and now Deebo Samuel around Jaden Daniels, I'm a big fan of. I don't think we are going to get 2021 Deebo Samuel anymore, but if we can get a mix of 2023 Deebo Samuel, I think this is going to be a good trade for the Commanders at least next year. So I'm going to give this a B+. They could spend this money right now. As for the San Francisco 49ers, I'm going to give this a C. It doesn't really help to part ways with somebody that's been there throughout your Super Bowl appearing teams in the past, but this team needed to trade Deebo Samuel this offseason. He was the odd man out. There could be a new extension to George Kittle, spent a first-round pick last year on a receiver in Ricky Pearsall. Jawan Jennings stepped up this year, and Brandon Ayuk is making a ton of money, who's also on the trade block, it seems, as well. But there's a new Brock Purdy contract extension coming. There's also a need to add an edge rusher to this team, an offensive line. So they had to free up some money in the long term. So I think trading Deebo Samuel was the right idea. It's just never the return you want to see for somebody that was that productive in San Fran. And this really isn't a trade, but it was the biggest contract extension for a defensive player in NFL history that went down today. Myles Garrett, who requested a trade this offseason. He didn't want to play for the Cleveland Browns anymore, and the Browns didn't want to trade him. And I guess the only way to convince Myles Garrett to come back was to make him the highest paid NFL player of all time, and they gave him a 4-year extension on his already 2-year deal. It's going to average $40 million a year for a non-quarterback. It has a maybe multiple day 2 picks as well, and you would be selling him at his highest value in his career. Now you're giving him $40 million a year for a team that's already in cap trouble with the Deshaun Watson deal. You're trying to figure out who your next quarterback is going to be of this team. Maybe it is going to be Cam Ward, and they can now afford to pay Myles Garrett because of that rookie contract incoming. But either way, I think this is a big risk to pay Myles Garrett all this money and give him a no trade clause for a team right now that isn't going to be competing for a Super Bowl at least in the next 2 to 3 seasons, the last 3 years of Myles Garrett's prime. So that's why I thought it would be a good idea to trade Myles Garrett. I think there's a ton of risks to this deal. I'm glad Browns fans are still going to be able to watch Myles Garrett every Sunday. But like I said, there's just a lot of risk to this deal, and I don't know if it's going to work out for them in the long term. And the domino effect from this extension as well, how much is TJ Watt going to get paid as he's a free agent next year? How much is Micah Parsons going to get paid? What is Trey Hendrickson going to go for on the open market? Because he's now getting traded out of Cincinnati. So yeah, a lot of dominoes can fall from this Myles Garrett extension. I'd love to know what you guys think about this deal down below. And let me know what you guys think about all these moves that I mentioned about in this video. Did you like them? Did you not? Let me know down below. Hit that subscribe button if you were not already. I'm going to be talking about all the day 1 free agency signings tomorrow night, so make sure you guys are subscribed. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.